It was supposed to be just another quiet evening in the city, the kind of night when the world hums softly in the background, lights shimmer against the glass of tall buildings, and laughter spills out of crowded restaurants. But inside one of the most exclusive dining establishments in Manhattan, there was a table that broke the rhythm of celebration. At that table sat a man who had once been the center of attention, the kind whose presence used to command a room, but now he was alone. The millionaire everyone knew about but few had ever really known, had come to dine by himself on his birthday. There was something hauntingly quiet about him. He didn't ask for the best table or call ahead for a private room. He simply walked in, wearing a dark coat, the kind that told of old money and understated power. His face was calm, perhaps even unreadable, but there was a weariness in his eyes, the kind that comes from living too long with memories that don't fade. The maitre d' recognized him instantly. After all, the man had once been featured in countless business magazines, praised for his brilliance, his bold deals, and his unstoppable rise. But tonight, there was no flash of success, no sparkle of wealth. Just a man, older and quieter, taking a seat at the corner of a restaurant filled with people too busy to notice the loneliness sitting just a few feet away. It was his 55th birthday. No friends had gathered. No family had called. The staff whispered his name behind the counter, piecing together bits of gossip they had read online. He was the tech investor who had built an empire from scratch, the one whose startup had revolutionized the way small businesses handled data. Years ago, he had been on top of the world, the kind of man whose schedule was packed with meetings, parties, interviews, and charity events. But then tragedy struck. A car accident took his wife and only son in a single night, and from that moment, his life turned into a shadow of what it once was. People said he became reclusive. Some said he stopped celebrating anything at all. For years, he disappeared from social events and public life, showing up only at board meetings and shareholder calls. And yet, here he was tonight, quietly choosing to spend his birthday alone. Perhaps it was habit, or maybe a kind of ritual, a way of keeping the ghosts close. The restaurant staff kept their distance, unsure whether to offer him warmth or silence. His table was set perfectly, white linen, silver utensils, a single candle flickering beside a plate of untouched food. He had ordered something simple: grilled salmon, vegetables, and a glass of mineral water. Nothing fancy, nothing indulgent. Every now and then, he would glance out the window, where the city sparkled like 1,000 tiny wishes. But his expression didn't change. At nearby tables, laughter rose and fell like waves. Groups celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, promotions. Cameras flashed as people took pictures of each other, clinking glasses and exchanging gifts. But the man at the corner remained still, untouched by the noise of joy around him. To anyone watching closely, it was clear he wasn't sad in a dramatic way. It was quieter than that, a deep, settled loneliness that had stopped asking for comfort. The waitstaff moved carefully around him, their steps measured, their words polite. They had been briefed to treat him with utmost respect. "He's private," the manager had whispered earlier. "Let him eat in peace." So they did. They refilled his glass when it ran low, cleared his plates without asking questions, and left him to his silence. Only one waitress, new to the restaurant, seemed to hesitate whenever she passed his table. She was young, maybe 23, with tired eyes from a long shift but a softness that came from genuine empathy. She couldn't help but notice the lonely candle on the table, one of those small decorative ones that burned low near the end of service. It wasn't a birthday candle, but in that moment, it seemed to hold all the meaning of one. As the evening stretched on, the restaurant began to thin out. The laughter faded, replaced by the quiet hum of closing time. Chairs were pushed in, floors were swept, and last orders were called. The millionaire remained seated, slowly sipping his water, lost in thought. Every now and then, he would look at the empty seat across from him as if expecting someone to appear. Perhaps, in another time, his wife had sat there, smiling, teasing him about work, reminding him to stop checking his phone. Maybe his son had once drawn on napkins while waiting for dessert. But tonight, those memories lived only in his mind. It was almost midnight when the waitress noticed he still hadn't left. She checked her watch, 11:58 p.m. The rest of the staff was cleaning up, laughing softly about tips and weekend plans. But she couldn't take her eyes off the man. Something about the sight of him sitting alone on what was supposed to be a special night made her chest tighten. She thought of her own father, who worked double shifts and often ate dinner by himself. She thought of birthdays spent without enough candles, without enough people. And before she could second-guess herself, she decided to do something about it. What she didn't know was that her small act of kindness, born out of a moment of empathy, was about to change her life forever. Because sitting at that table wasn't just a rich man in a dark suit, it was someone who had once believed in miracles but had long forgotten how to find them. And in less than 2 minutes, the clock would strike 11:59, and a quiet restaurant would become the scene of a story the world would talk about for years to come. Outside, the city kept glowing, unaware of the history about to unfold inside. The soft jazz music played its final notes, the last customers paid their checks, and the young waitress, clutching a tiny cupcake she had bought herself, took a deep breath and walked toward the table in the corner, toward the man whose life, and hers, were both about to take a turn they never saw coming. The clock neared midnight, and the soft murmur of the nearly empty restaurant echoed like a lullaby in the background. Most of the tables were cleared, chairs turned slightly inward, and the staff moved in slow, quiet rhythm, the kind of tired but gentle pace that came after a long shift. The millionaire still sat at his table, his glass now empty, his gaze lost somewhere in the reflections of the city lights on the window. There was no rush in his movements, no urgency in his posture. He simply looked like a man waiting for time to pass. It was 11:59 p.m. when the waitress approached. Her name was Emily Carter, a young woman trying to balance a life between dreams and necessity. She worked long hours, saving every dollar to one day attend culinary school. But tonight, she wasn't thinking about her ambitions. Her eyes were on the lonely man who hadn't smiled once all evening, and something deep inside her refused to let the night end this way. She had been raised to believe that no one deserved to be forgotten, not even a stranger who could afford everything in the world except company. Emily walked to the small service counter, her steps hesitant but determined. She took a plain cupcake from the kitchen, one she had bought earlier to eat on her break, and gently stuck a single candle into it. It wasn't much. The frosting had smudged a little, and the candle leaned slightly to the side, but it was sincere. With one hand steadying the plate, she carried it toward his table, her heart pounding. The flicker of the tiny flame cast a soft light across the room, and for a brief moment, even the air seemed to pause. When she reached him, the man looked up, puzzled. No one had approached him since he sat down. He had expected silence, maybe another refill of water, but certainly not a candlelit cupcake. Emily's voice trembled slightly as she spoke, but her sincerity gave it strength. "Sir," she said gently, "I know this might be out of place, but I couldn't let your birthday end like this. So, happy birthday." She smiled, just a little, nervous and hopeful at once. No one should be alone on their birthday. The words hung in the air, fragile and simple, but they carried a warmth that even the finest wines or richest meals couldn't offer. For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes, tired and unreadable all evening, softened in a way that startled her. It was as if her small act had cracked something open, something he had buried for years beneath layers of success, control, and grief. He looked at the cupcake, then at her, and finally, his lips parted slightly. "It's been 20 years, he said quietly, his voice rough from disuse, "since anyone said that to me." His eyes shimmered, and for a second, Emily thought she saw him fight back tears. She didn't know what to do, so she just stood there, hands clasped in front of her, feeling suddenly small but strangely certain she had done the right thing. The man took a deep breath, his gaze drifting back to the tiny flame dancing before him. He watched it like someone seeing light for the first time in a long while. Then, almost hesitantly, he blew it out. The sound was soft, but the silence that followed was filled with emotion, the kind of silence that spoke of memories too deep to name. "Would you sit for a moment?" he asked after a while, his tone calm but sincere. Emily blinked in surprise, unsure if it was appropriate, but the warmth in his eyes made it impossible to refuse. She nodded and slowly sat across from him, still holding onto her tray nervously. For the first time all night, his expression shifted from distant to human. He asked her name, and she told him. Then, the conversation began to flow, quietly at first, then more easily, as though they were two souls finding each other in the middle of the world's noise. He asked why she worked there, and she told him about her dream to open a small bakery one day. She spoke about saving tips, about the nights she went home exhausted but refused to give up. She told him how food, to her, wasn't just about recipes but about people, about bringing comfort and connection to those who had lost it. He listened closely, his hands folded neatly on the table, as though her every word was something precious. When she asked about him, his eyes clouded again. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully, like someone unearthing memories that still hurt to touch. He told her about his wife, who had loved baking on weekends, and about his son, who would insist on staying up late to taste her cookies fresh out of the oven. He told her about the night he lost them, about how birthdays had since become a reminder, not a celebration. Emily didn't interrupt. She didn't try to comfort him with empty phrases. She simply listened, her eyes gentle and her presence steady. And in that quiet exchange, between a weary man who had lost everything and a young woman still struggling to build her future, something extraordinary happened. The weight in the room seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile understanding that transcended age, class, and circumstance. For that 1 hour, they weren't Millionaire and Waitress, they were just two human beings, sitting across from each other, sharing stories of loss and hope. When the clock struck midnight, Emily realized she should probably return to her duties. She stood to leave, thanking him for sharing his story, but before she could walk away, he reached into his pocket and took out a business card. "If you ever need a chance," he said softly, handing it to her, "call this number. You remind me of someone who used to believe that kindness could still change the world. Don't lose that." She hesitated, confused, but accepted the card with a polite nod. She thanked him again and wished him a good night before heading back toward the counter. The man watched her go, his expression unreadable but lighter somehow, as if a door inside him had been opened for the first time in years. When he finally left the restaurant, the city had grown quiet. The streets shimmered with faint reflections of the streetlights, and for the first time in a long while, the millionaire smiled, not the practiced smile of business meetings or formal dinners, but a real, quiet one. The kind that comes when the heart remembers how to feel again. Emily didn't know that moment at 11:59 would ripple far beyond that night. She didn't know the man who had sat alone with his grief would soon return with an offer that would change her life completely. She only knew that she had followed her heart, and somehow, in doing so, had given someone else a reason to believe again. Sometimes, the smallest gestures, a cupcake, a candle, a kind word, can bridge the distance between two worlds. And that night, in the final minute before a new day began, Emily's compassion became the spark that rekindled hope in a life that had forgotten what warmth felt like.